Welcome to another edition of the Industry Podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the one, the only, the magnificent Dr. Ellen Wald. Dr. Energy Ellen Wald. I messed that up. All those. Yeah, sorry, Ellen. Ellen, how you doing?
I'm good. Oil markets aren't so good, but I'm good.
Oil's not doing well. Corona is, I guess you would say coronavirus is doing well, which is not good. Is that how you would say that the right way?
Hey, so viruses basically want to multiply. They need a host and they want to multiply. So at least that's my rudimentary understanding of viruses.
You're the only doctor on the podcast, so it works for me. And there's another Dr. Ellen Wald who has the same name as you, who is a doctor.
Yes, she is a medical doctor, and she could probably tell you a whole lot more about viruses than I could. So
but we're going to pretend that you. Yeah. I did see this morning a report from, I think it was Kenya. And they have like 100 people in Wuhan. I think is where it was. They're in China. I think it's all in Wuhan. And they're like, y'all stay there. We're going to send you money. they're not letting them come home.
That's great. I know, hey, novel approach to coronavirus from Kenya.
There you go.
Sit tight. We'll send you money.
We'll send you money. Just stay over there. Don't worry about it. We'll give you some money. So, yeah, it's like 91 students and 9 artists. I don't know what the artists are doing there, if they're singers or musicians or painters or sculptors. But anyways, so
I have a friend who, from graduate school. He teaches at Duke Kushan University. So he speaks Chinese, studied Chinese long for grad school. But anyway, he teaches at this like kind of satellite whatever university of Duke that's in Kushan. I'm not really sure where that is in China. But anyway, apparently they have had to like completely redo their entire approach. They basically took everything and made an entirely like online university in, like 2 weeks in order to get the semester going. And they're just all teaching online because they're not, I don't think they're like in Wuhan or anything. They're not like at an epicenter or anything, but they don't want to germs spread like mad in a university. I remember when I was a graduate student and there was swine flu. And it was like, there was definitely swine flu in the university I was teaching at BU. And they were basically like, they like decided there was like one dorm that was for kids who had swine flu. And, as a graduate student, I was like, should I cancel my office hours? How do I like not touch things that students touch? I mean, like dorms are cesspools of germs. So, but I think it'll be a really interesting experiment almost to see how this semester, this totally online semester goes.
Interesting. I will say this, and we're not going to get into this on the show, but I am disappointed that all the debates our country has had about immigration policy, this would be a great time to revisit those debates and say, how should a country act as far as immigration policy, open borders, closed borders, wherever you come at. So if you're in that space, this podcast, this is your time to put forth your best argument, because now you have something that makes it a little bit more complicated rather than someone coming over getting a job or not. This is an interesting time to have those debates, but I have not seen those, unfortunately.
I'm going to put on my historian hat for a minute and say that was one of the big concerns in, like the 1800s or early 1900s when, with immigrants coming to the United States. And that was one of the main reasons that immigrants were processed at Ellis Island and then also in Galveston in Texas, because these were kind of contained areas where people could be quarantined if they had some kind of disease. And in some cases, people weren't actually allowed to get on ships and were separated from their families because they had like scabies in their hair or something like that. Which was not uncommon. I mean, tuberculosis was probably the big concern at that time, scarlet fever, those kinds of really, communicable diseases. But there were like serious quarantine facilities in Ellis Island, and people who arrived who showed signs of being sick were quarantined there. And that was how they were able to kind of keep these diseases contained. And that was a major, major issue in terms of immigrants coming. So historian hat off now.
Historian hat off. And I have to give you a little bit of grief here, Ellen. Ellen picks the articles for every show. Last week on this show, we talked about the impact on the global economy of a fracking ban. And after that podcast came out, it seems like miraculously all this news about Russia and Bernie Sanders, and it's like I didn't see us get credited anywhere. Did you?
Yeah, no.
I mean, we credited ourselves, of course, but I didn't see the mainstream bringing in how this was dissected on this podcast.
Yeah, they really should have, because we were there first.
We know they're not smart enough to think about it themselves, so obviously we did it for them.
Of course not.
Okay, I just want to get that little attaboy, because no one else is going to do it if we don't do it ourselves. Okay.
Oh, yes.
We got a few articles, and then Dr. Dean Foreman will be joining us for his monthly recap. Okay, let's go to CNBC. China's recent air pollution levels may be telling a story about the coronavirus impact on its economy. And a couple things here, Ellen, from the article. Analysts are using pollution level, talking about air pollution levels, as a gauge of industrial activity. Major cities in China are well known for being choked by smog due to the extensive burning of coal by factories. Just a real quick comment on that. When I was in China last year in Beijing, and if I can get the pictures to Nate, I'll get them over to him. He can post them on the thing. And they were talking, one of the people we met with had been working overseas or out of country for China for like 5 years, and he came back and he said that the day it would be like a full overcast day here in the States, and he was saying that that was actually one of the better days compared to 5 years ago. It was a good day, and that they actually have days now they see the sun, and 5 years ago they didn't have that, and so he was talking about how much better it's gotten in that short period of time. So take that for what it's worth, but we were kind of like, man, it's cloudy here every day. Oh wait, that's not. Those are clouds. Those are clouds. That's just smog. So, anyways, so air pollution, coal consumption, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that we've been seeing a decline in coal consumption. There were some pretty interesting satellite photos that Tanker Trackers had posted, I think last week, basically showing like barges full of. Okay, so I think in order to make steel, you need iron ore and coking coal. I'm drawing on from when I used to teach international relations. Yeah, no, this is actually back on the historian hat. So I used to teach history of international relations, and one of the big things we taught was World War I and World War II. And so the big issue between Germany and France, and the reason why everyone wanted the Alsace-Lorraine territory between them, was because one side had coking coal and the other side had iron ore, and you needed them both to make steel. And so they were always fighting over that area anyway. So, but the satellite pictures were showing these barges full of, I think, the coking coal, and they're just like sitting there, not using them. They're like coming up the river, and then there's just a backup, which I think gives a good indication about steel production from China, that it's not happening, or at least good portions of it are not happening.
Yeah, and one of the things that stuck out in the article to me was this is a few paragraphs after readers want to go read it. On February 20th, Thursday, daily coal consumption of 6 major power plants was 42.5% less than the same time last year, according to, is it Nomura, which has been tracking such daily metrics. Nomura,
just a bank. It's a Japanese bank.
Yeah, Japanese bank, right? But that's a pretty significant drop off there.
Yeah. And, it will be interesting to see is if anybody else in the global supply chain decides to pick that up, because, I mean, China doesn't just produce steel for its own consumption. It's producing steel that it ships around the world. So, Turkey produces steel. I know that because we tried to sanction it. Maybe they'll be able to pick it up. I mean, it's not, I think that everyone's focused on the destruction of, the global economy that's happening, but there are also opportunities in that, not to like make light of suffering and things like that, but there are, for people looking for opportunities, hey, China's not making it, and you can.
Right. Well, and we saw this also with China. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago, where the article was talking about China? They might be refining a lot of products, but they're actually buying up oil because the prices are dropping, so they're buying it up cheaper to store it to then refine it later on. So
yeah, exactly. Which to me, okay, so that the whole thing is very confusing to me, because so it either I actually wrote about this in my investing.com article. I kind of thought worked it through, and I was thinking, so if they're not using if they're buying oil because it's cheap now, that means though that they think that prices are going to go up, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't buy, and they would buy more. They would wait till prices go down and then buy later, right? So the hedge is that they think prices are going to go up. Okay, that's one possibility. Or or the guys who buy the oil are being told from their higher ups, keep buying, proceed as normal, in order to make it look like everything is okay. So I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but
well, I don't know about that. You don't know what the indicators are. They are buying it, and buying it obviously keeps the price up too, though, right?
Yeah.
Because if they don't buy it, the price goes down.
Oh yeah, I mean, because
they could not. Well, I was saying that they could not buy it, and then it'd be cheaper, and they could buy more for the same dollar.
Exactly. Why don't they not buy it, have it go down more, and then buy? But the fact that they're buying must mean that they think that it's going to go up anyway. So they're taking advantage of the low price while they can.
Yeah, it's closer to what they call it, the resistant line or lower level or whatever that technical term they use for. Yeah, it's bottoming out.
Yeah, I slept through most of Econ 101.
Okay, well then, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't know it, then I definitely don't know it. Okay, let's go. Let's see here. Oops, that's the chart opened up. Let's go to. Let's see here. Yep, I'm gonna get in trouble now. Wall Street Journal: Saudis weigh breaking oil alliance with Russia as virus crimps demand. Now, this article is co-authored by Summer. Is it Saeed?
Yeah.
And now I gotta be careful here because I just saw her getting on people who say words like I say them publicly. So I'm not going to say any foreign countries. I'm going to say Middle East here a lot, so Summer doesn't get on to me. And I'm being facetious, of course. But you know,
Summer knows that we love her.
We love you, Summer. We love you, even though I don't say Iran or Iran or.
See,
Iran
there you go.
I'd say I don't even know which one. I'm so confused.
But you may offend the entire French people if you mispronounce Benoit's name incorrectly.
Oh man. Okay, so Saudi Arabia is considering a break from its 4-year oil production alliance with Russia. Hashtag bromance is over, according to people familiar with the matter, as the China's coronavirus outbreak contributes to a drop in global oil demand. Now, one thing to consider, and we talked about this on the show, maybe last year or this year, is that China and Russia are becoming closer trade partners, right? So Huawei is either the only or the main Russian phone network system now for 5G and stuff like that. And then they have the pipeline from Russia that goes into China. So you do have this tension here, but also I wonder how much the Chinese-Russian relationship is playing into Russia's actions by not wanting to cut demand or increasing demand or whatever.
Oh, that is a really good point. I did not think about the China-Russia relations kind of weighing on this at all. But that is a really, really good point to consider, is that they have other connections. And if they, if Russia's out there saying, we don't think we need a cut because this isn't so bad, then that's basically like towing the Chinese line. And they're helping amplify the Chinese message of, we got this. And that's a really interesting perspective, because I was looking at this more of the fact that that this was basically like an attempt by Saudi Arabia to try to use whatever tiny bit of leverage it has left over Russia. Basically, all they have is the media, so they're saying, we're about to break it off as a way to kind of pressure them to get on board with this extra cut that they want. And then they kind of get this article out there, Wall Street Journal, and then an hour or two later, the oil minister, the oil minister, who's also Prince Abdulaziz, comes out and says, there is absolutely nothing, legitimate in this report. We are best friends with Russia, but still, it was out there. But I think that's a really important point to consider, is that when you look at the relation, how important is Russia's relationship with OPEC and Saudi Arabia compared to its relationship with China? And I think that the answer to that question every time is going to be China.
China, especially the Huawei thing, I don't think can be underestimated, because if you just believe the worst things about Huawei, then and you look at the Russian government having access to that technology would be something that they'd want. I'm not saying that's true or not. I don't know, but it is something to consider. But yeah, I'm not sure where it comes at. But what you're saying doesn't necessarily run into conflict with what I'm saying either. It could be that the Saudis are trying to leverage that. They just don't have the same leverage as they would if Russia and China weren't as I don't know if trade friendly is the right way to put it, but friendlier over the past year and a half as they've become. And so it's it's not as clear. It feels like the more the world becomes more interconnected, the harder it is to figure out who's friends with who.
Yeah.
It's like third grade. Are we still friends? Yes, no, circle.
Yes, no, maybe. Check here. Can we just could we, instead of having an OPEC meeting and like having a scrum and all that, because by the way, they should totally not have a scrum. The scrum is where all the reporters basically like pack themselves into this hallway in really close quarters and try not to have their heads taken off by the TV cameras. And then they all have a mad dash into the room to like interview the ministers. And they always like surround, the Saudi minister, obviously. So like, hey, there's coronavirus in Iran, and the Iranian oil minister Zanganeh confirmed that he's coming to the OPEC meeting in March. Maybe they just shouldn't have the scrum. Like they canceled it before. I mean, they say it's because basically like it's dangerous and people have gotten hurt in the process, and it is kind of dangerous. Like I've seen it happen. It's not a pleasant thing.
Right.
So they just like canceled it, and they didn't have the ministers just weren't available to take questions, to be like interviewed before the meeting. But maybe there's a very good reason to cancel it for health reasons, like coronavirus. Would you want to have an epicenter of coronavirus started because of an OPEC meeting? I mean, come on, imagine how bad that would look.
Oh, that would be. You couldn't write that story. You just couldn't. Like truth is stranger than fiction type deal there. I know we got the OPEC. I know we got a few articles, but real quick, before we move off to the next article, we got Dr. Foreman coming on. So next Thursday, I believe, is the OPEC meeting, right? The 5th.
Yes, the 5th and 6th. I'm not going to be there. Just so our listeners know, I will not be there. I will be following everything, but I will not actually be in Vienna. Economy. Oh yeah.
So real quick. We got the Russia story before, so next week everything will be hot and heavy. But what might someone who's following the OPEC stuff be looking forward to come out this week? Is there any strategic maneuvering you might be looking for? Any earnings reports or conference calls, or tankers being freed from Libya?
Yeah, so Libya is like nobody even cares about Libya anymore. I would just look for a lot of posturing from Saudi Arabia. So here's another thing a headline that just came out. Saudi Aramco CEO, so that's different from the Crown Prince. We're talking Ahmed Nasser says he expects coronavirus impact on oil demand to be short-lived, which is interesting because that would be an argument, I guess, in favor of Russia's position, which is like sit tight and it's not going to have a big effect. Whether he's speaking for himself or for other oil producers is unclear, but I do think we're going to see a lot of posturing. Here's the thing. The March meeting was originally supposed to be a meeting at which they were going to meet and decide whether or not to continue the cuts that they agreed to in December all the way through June. Right. So those are technically, I think, still on the table. So they can get together and agree on more cuts that aren't really more cuts. Or they can get together and agree on more cuts, which were the ones that they were talking. Yeah, so that's the technical term, by the way. More cuts.
Yeah, more cuts. And let's kind of unpack all that. So they met, the OPEC plus JTC met 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
that's when they were talking. Yeah,
that's when they were talking like another, I think 600,000 barrels per day, and Russia's like, we need
analyze
more time.
The market. Yeah, we got to analyze the market. We got to do some more math spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And they're still analyzing the markets as of today. So they're still looking at it.
But this recent drop could give Saudi Arabia some leverage to pressure Russia to do this, to agree to cuts.
Yeah, and the thing that's been interesting is, I think between now and we got a little bit over a week and a half, but is if you go back on the coronavirus timeline, was it last week? China came out and said, well, the way they've been monitoring and detecting the coronavirus was wrong or not as accurate. And so they found a new method or whatever. And so the number of cases exploded
China
overnight. Yeah.
China, we have no idea what we're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah. Well, I saw an article about someone, I think it was in Zambia or Zimbabwe, or I can't remember where it was, and they had this lady tested, and she was cleared, and then they said, "We're going to still quarantine you just to be safe." They gave her an official certificate that said she did not have the coronavirus, and they still put her in quarantine. It's like,
Oh, I
wait,
would.
what's the purpose of the certificate?
So, apparently you can have no symptoms. Like, apparently 14% of people who actually get the flu have no symptoms, who test positive for the flu have no symptoms, like the regular flu. So, but what's interesting is I'll try to link to it in the show notes, but I saw this really interesting thing from the New York Times. They got this woman who she was on like the last flight out of Americans who
Oh, I
were
saw that.
evacuated.
Yeah,
Did
yeah,
you
yeah,
see
yeah, yeah.
that? It
I saw
was
you tweeted. I went and checked it out. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was
You
really
should.
interesting. She basically like kept a diary, but also
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a photo diary
Mm-hmm.
of her quarantine, of her experience of the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. And it just seemed like she was they were very scared in Wuhan. These were people who were evacuated from Wuhan.
Mm-hmm.
Like her family lives there. There was a lot of fear. And
Right.
then when they got to this base, she seemed like she was very, it wasn't a fun thing to do, obviously, but she felt like they were being well taken care of, and that this was
Mm-hmm.
something that they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people were very angry at the people who were quarantining them, and she
Yeah.
seemed to be very upset that they were so upset at them because those people were doing the best they could.
Yeah, that was the debate. That was the plane, if you remember, on the news that was talking about the U.S. government sent over a plane to get folks
Yeah,
out and bring them back. So yeah, Ellen, that was from the New York Times, I think. Yeah, share that in the show notes. That'd be good. But
yeah.
I guess my point is, over the next 7 to 10 days, I would expect you're going to see a lot of articles about the coronavirus naturally, but maybe even a little bit more than normal, because if in 7 to 10 days the World Health Organization comes out and says, "Hey, we've got this thing whooped and we know how to treat it or prevent it or whatever," and I don't think it's going to happen. But if that does come out, the tenor of the OPEC meeting is fundamentally different. If they come out in the next 3 to 5 days and say, "Oh my gosh, turns out there's triple the cases that we thought there were. We didn't really," so that could actually steer some of this conversation. A week and a half from now, I don't know
Oh, yeah.
what else would be a big market mover that you might see? I think you said there's going to be a lot of posturing, but there's not a. That seems to be the thing that everyone's kind of hung up on at the moment.
Yeah, agree.
Okay. Any final comments before we get to Dr. Foreman, who will be on here in just a second?
Um, Yeah, I just want to mention one issue, one of the last articles. So it was this piece about it's a Canadian company that pulled an oil project right before it was supposed to be, the ruling on it was supposed to happen, and they basically said that they were going to do a multi-billion-dollar oil sands mine, and they basically said that there's so much regulatory and policy uncertainty when it comes to Canada's climate issues that they just can't go forward, even though they were probably going to get approval for it. And I think that really encapsulates a lot of what we're seeing in the market today, is that there's an incredible amount of uncertainty, both policy wise, and it's not just coronavirus and demand, but it's also this idea of a response to climate change, the U.S. election. Everything is there's an incredible amount of uncertainty, and I think that is holding back companies, but it's also causing a lot of instability and volatility in the market. So,
So I'm not going to let you make a prediction next week. So you got to make one this week. Will we have more cuts at OPEC?
more cuts. I think we'll get an extension of the current cuts that will be really pushed as like as a response to coronavirus.
Yeah,
But
and
I wouldn't.
that will
I
mean the
think
markets will not like that.
I don't think they will, because I think that this extra cut was kind of baked in, at least, and so we're seeing a response to the fact that it never materialized. But I just don't think that Russia's going to give in, and it could be a long couple days. Stock up on snacks, guys, who are going to be covering it, because I think it could be some marathon meetings, and unless if oil prices fall for the next 2 weeks, I think that would definitely push. If we see WTI down at like 40, near the $40 range, and Brent, and if Brent falls like another $5 or $10, then I think you'll see a real push to react. I think Russia would probably be scared by that. But unless that, I think we'll just get the status quo rolled over. There you go.
Reported
That's my
here
unofficial
first.
prediction.
Reported here first. So mainstream media, please attribute Dr. Ellen Wald when you report those facts a week from Thursday. So
when you steal our story again.
Once again, joining us for his monthly appearance, Dr. Dean Foreman with the American Petroleum Institute. Dr. Foreman, how's it going, sir?
Ryan, Ellen, it's going great. Thanks again for having me.
Well, it seems that everywhere you turn and you look about the oil and gas market, the word coronavirus appears, and you guys are no different as you talk about the coronavirus and the impact on the market. Why don't we start there? What have you guys seen, and what takeaways have you observed as the virus is continually spreads, it seems?
Yeah, it seems we're still on the front end of this, and it has been definitely dominating headlines. It's been dominating a lot of the price action that we've seen in global oil markets. So there's no question that both from a crude oil perspective and then a definite refined product perspective, I think talking about things like jet fuel, that it is having an impact. And we expected, based on the January data, and we're two months ahead of EIA putting monthly statistics together, right? But we expect to see more probably in February and March to really see the global and U.S. impact play out. What we've seen at this point is there's no question as of January that there was an expected drop in U.S. petroleum demand. We saw that. It was the growth year on year, which had been trending close to 3% for jet fuel, just evaporated. It was still up fractionally year on year for January, but basically when 2 and 3% growth disappears in a month and you're on the front end of it, you know it's a big deal.
Yeah, and also if we look,
sorry. No, besides coronavirus, I mean, we also had IMO 2020 marine fuel specs kicking in on January 1. That also affected demand, and we expected that to come, but it did so in some unexpected ways. So there's a good story to come of that. And then on the production side, this was a very well supplied market coming into the year. Now we have this negative demand shock with the virus, and we're continuing to hit production records in the US. So you couple more supply with lower demand, and you get the price impact that we're seeing.
Yeah, I was going to go to the supply next. It feels like every week we turn around and the supply inventory news is not what we're wanting to hear. And your report didn't help that at all. I was hoping that maybe you were going to say they're all wrong. We're about to run out of oil. The prices would skyrocket, but no. Tell us what you found in the inventory data.
Well, we survey 90% of industry every week on this stuff, so there's no spin on it. The data are what they are. These are valid estimates of how much is out there. And despite less drilling, we are at crude oil and natural gas liquids still hitting on all cylinders. Now, EIA, if you look at the U.S. Energy Information Administration, their outlook would have the U.S. this quarter compared to a year ago, basically up about 2 million barrels per day of total liquids. That pace is, by their estimates, expected to continue over the first half of this year before changing and ebbing. By the time you get to fourth quarter, they've got the oil year-on-year growth rate basically cut in half. So we're going from 2 million barrels per day by their estimates down to 900,000 barrels per day as an exit rate later this year. And then on the gas side, we go from healthy growth at the beginning of this year to a contraction by fourth quarter. So look, in terms of what's baked in their estimates, and they're building this up both from the top down and the bottom up and merging it, it sure looks like the production situation changes later this year, but we are where we are as of this point in time.
Yeah, let me ask you about the jet fuel, because you mentioned that a minute ago. I think the last time I looked, it was 60 or 70 airlines have either canceled or modified their schedule in regards to China. If we go back to the Boeing 737 MAX situation, you talked about how they kind of reshuffle things with regards to planes, and they might use planes that are less fuel efficient. Well, this is a lot larger scale. I mean, what happens to all these planes? They can be grounded. Will they go new routes? Or is this going to be a long-term problem? Or is there a way that the airline industry can make back this demand growth by trying new routes or something different? Or are we just kind of stuck with this problem until the virus kind of tapers off?
It's going to have to play out. It's going to have to take whatever course it's going to take. And what's different than, say, the SARS virus in 2003 is really two things. First is that China is a much larger share of the global economy than it was 17 years ago. And secondly, that nations that trade and transport with China a lot have been much more proactive in putting these air travel restrictions in place, which is a bigger fuel impact in the near term, but probably prevents more contagion. This thing's technically not a pandemic yet. Its mortality rate of about 2% is not equivalent to even what SARS was 17 years ago. So on that basis, despite the way the financial markets are digesting that there is some spread of this globally, it's in the scheme of things, relative to the billions of people in play, if there's a silver lining, it's not that bad yet. It's a very bad flu. It can have a bad economic impact, a bad human impact, but in the scheme of things, it doesn't even look as bad as SARS at this point. And with SARS, with air travel, if you start from the beginning and go to the end, air travel was 100% back to its starting point within 6 to 7 months.
One of the big, I think, differences and that makes it hard to make comparisons though with SARS is what else was happening in the world at the same time as SARS, which was the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which is a global economically altering event. I'm not sure if that really affects air travel so much, but in terms of the effect that it may have had on kind of the global economy, I think it makes it hard to separate what was happening in terms of military and diplomatic policy in the Middle East and also SARS. So I do think it's important, at least I'm going to put my historian hat on again, to be cautious in making like one-to-one comparisons, because there are so many other factors at play. I mean, yes, the U.S. is still involved in the Middle East militarily, but not in any way like they were in 2003.
Ellen, that's a great point, and I think you're right. We have to be mindful of the history and not oversimplify it. From a supply perspective, we are more diverse from an oil market perspective in our supply than we were then, and we have basically balanced the global oil market recently, with OPEC having dialed back before this 1.7 million barrels per day year on year, and the estimate was before the coronavirus. EIA had assumed that by January, OPEC would be dialing back another 500,000 barrels per day. So look, stabilizing this in the near term versus looking at the situation, the fact is there is an abundance of supply right now, and we'll see how it plays out over the course of the year.
So do you think that will push? We've been kind of having this debate of what is OPEC going to do, come March, and they were originally supposed to, or hopefully going to roll over their cuts from December. A lot of people are saying, oh, they're gonna cut more. I'm kind of, at least before we. In the first part of the podcast, I was on the I don't think they're going to be able to get it together to cut more camp. But the way you presented this, the raw, the data makes it sound like they have no choice but to cut. And just curious what your thoughts on that are.
It's hard to say because it depends on being inside the conversation with what their objectives are right now. Now, in a sense, where the industry stands from a financial standpoint, from a production standpoint, there are a lot of shale producers that want to make it through this rough patch here, and OPEC might decide to stabilize its revenues and stabilize the market, or they might not, a la 2015. I can't really speculate on that. I think you're actually closest to having a read on the politics of what might play out there, but it is a really pivotal point from an industry standpoint in terms of more competitiveness, more production, more growth, and these prices will continue to help stabilize the global economy, increase demand. We'll see how it plays out.
So one of the things I'm curious about is we're seeing a lot of low gas prices across the nation because the prices are low. I mean, I think in San Antonio, Texas, the other day I saw Gas Buddy was saying it had like the second lowest price in the nation. We're not to summer vacation. We're not there yet, but the gas prices are low. But then if you look at stories like the Japanese cruise ship, which quarantined all these people, so it's you have low gas prices, but you also have this potential fear, especially for international travel. As we move forward and we get into the driving season, how long will it take us to kind of figure out, okay, are motorists going to drive? Are they going to go take these long vacations? Are they going to spend their extra money? Because we are, well, we're almost in March now. And so it, it feels like 2020 just started, but we're in March in a week and a half. And so, you know, you got spring break coming up and all stuff. But you have this coronavirus. I'm not sure how much Americans are concerned about that. But, you know, my wife was wanting to take a Disney cruise with the kids. I said, I'm not getting on a cruise ship until they promise they're not going to lock me on that thing anymore. So I'm not touching that action.
Yeah, I would think the same way in terms of being cautious on that end. But, you know, we've seen during different price cycles and different things like this where people, they still have a desire to take a vacation. They actually have more disposable income to do it right now because of the low prices. And we'll see, it just may shift the kind of vacation, the kind of travel, going visiting family, a national park, driving across the country, the things that maybe they wanted to do. And maybe it's not the vacation to Australia or something, but it could be just a different kind that ends up actually being stimulative, at least in the United States.
Yeah, I think we covered a story, and I don't know if you guys did back this up, that said that when the prices drop, whatever percentage it is, motorists usually like double their gas bill because they don't do the math on what they're actually saving and they actually spend more. And obviously coronavirus is a big concern here, but it just did make you wonder if you're looking at, you know, destinations where there would be an international presence here in the States, if you would see that. But, you know, it is, we're getting closer to the driving season, so it's something to watch for.
I mean, I would say it's definitely a concern. I mean, I even just, you know, I'm not planning on doing anything, but I was invited to some conference in Bahrain in March, and suddenly and I wasn't really thinking of going, but I was, you know, saw, oh, they have a case of coronavirus in Bahrain, and you think, well, you know, I think there's an issue of like, do you trust the authorities to deal with this in a proactive way? And, you know, the trust that people have in the US government may be, I don't know, I'm not going to presume, but people maybe trust the CDC more than they trust like the Bahraini health authorities. So, you know, if it was a choice between going to Bahrain or going somewhere in the US, I would like, I'm going to stick to the US because you never know.
Yeah.
And I suspect if you are in certain resorts in the United States, your inbound travel of international tourists is probably going to be curtailed as a result of this for the same exact concern.
Right. So one thing, Dr. Foreman, and I know you guys can't make a prediction, so this is looking back. Let's ask looking back. We're getting into election season, and everyone talks about the impact of our market to election season. I've heard people speculate about, you know, what the Saudis are going to do because of the election season. How much does historical presidential elections have on the oil and gas market? How much of what we're seeing here is a reservation to let the price get out of hand because they're afraid of either a continuance of the current administration or a change in administration? And how much will, if any, will that impact what we see as pricing going forward? So not a prediction, but from a historical perspective, I know you don't make the forward-looking predictions.
Well, Ryan, you've asked really the question of the year in that sense, because
well, hold on. Just stop there. Question of the year. I've got it.
No, it is the fantastic thing. If we all knew the answer, I think we'd maybe be in different professions, because being able to predict that is really even more difficult than the political outcome itself, in the sense that on the Democratic side, you have multiple candidates who've advocated actively for bans on fracking of different flavors, from just federal lands to a Bernie Sanders saying he'd completely ban everything, or Elizabeth Warren doing the same. So API has done a study, actually we've just released today on this, showing the trillions of dollars of negative adverse impact and just how it would eviscerate this industry in the United States, given that 95% of the wells are now hydraulically fractured. So if you go one direction with the election, it is tectonic in terms of what it means for the US-based natural gas and oil industry. Now, if we shift to the other side and say the Trump administration wins re-election, it continues, there's some continuity, we continue to move in this direction, we have more other different kinds of challenges, both domestically and internationally, to take on. So it's not clear sailing, and we're already in a market cycle that has its own challenges, right? But it's tectonically different. It's hard to predict based on history what might happen there. If you can lay out, though, thinking about what the different political cycles would mean in terms of advantaging either domestic production vis-a-vis international production, what it would mean for the price environment. The snapshot of this study, basically, of a fracking ban on a nationwide basis says almost immediately, within a year, you go to triple-digit oil prices, and you stay there for the better part of a decade. It's that tectonic. So you're talking doubling, basically, where we are today.
Okay. Ellen, I have one more question, but if you got one, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, I was just going to add one point, which is to say that some of the candidates, I will not say who, have actually proposed banning offshore drilling as well.
Yep, they're going all out. So let's talk about real quick. Let's
Good
talk about
point.
imports and exports. So according to your report here, let me see if I got it here. It was the highest exports for January, but we were also a net importer for the month. Did I get that right? Did I say that correctly? Highest exports.
Yeah,
still were net
fractionally,
import?
that's right. You know, we've been celebrating this major milestone as of last September of being a net exporter of oil and total energy for the first time in almost 60 years. And you know, this situation in the near term has had some backsliding that's come with it. So the exports in December had an all-time record of 9 million barrels per day, total petroleum. That's crude oil and refined products. That backslid by a couple 100,000 barrels per day to 8.8 million barrels per day as of January. On the import side, though, we saw our total imports actually go up to 9.1 million barrels per day. So yes, on net for January, the U.S. was an importer on net, but we expect that per EIA's expectations will turn around this year.
Okay, so more of the anomaly, not the norm, you're thinking.
Yeah, I think we're in a short-term anomaly based on the way this is playing out. And again, we would wait and see because we're still on the front end of it.
I had one more question. Sorry. I wanted to, we talked last time about the phase one trade deal and the fact that China had agreed to purchase so much energy products in whatever, whatever mix that looks like from the U.S. And so apparently there's a clause that lets them kind of either get out of that or put it off due to an act of God, which apparently coronavirus can be claimed as. So, one of the things I was thinking is, well, maybe that's actually good for American producers because they can use that or infrastructure to kind of beef up U.S. infrastructure because, if you're saying like this thing is going to resolve and then China is still obligated essentially to buy all this stuff, maybe like use that time to kind of beef up the infrastructure so that America can actually supply this because we were talking about that American infrastructure is not actually prepared to supply all of this energy in whatever form it is to the Chinese. But where are we on this? Like, how are we seeing the trade deal impact? Statistic. I mean, I guess this going forward now that we're in this kind of holding pattern.
So I really like your question and the way you're thinking. Let me try to unpack two aspects of it. The first is in terms of what's China actually buying, and keep in mind that we're looking at aggregate trade statistics. And we won't see the China-specific, country-specific, destination kinds of statistics for a couple of months. But what we can observe through the price action between relative international and U.S. crude oil prices is that the gap between those narrowed substantially in January. So we had been, like last May, at $10.50 a barrel difference with Brent crude oil being higher than West Texas Intermediate. In December, that was closer to $7.50. And we've seen as of early February where that went down almost to $3 per barrel. I mean, it really came down and narrowed. Now, Brent, as you'd expect with weakness internationally, came down more than WTI. So there is a virus impact that's probably evident here. But the other cushioning impact, and part of why you would see more pull from the Gulf Coast and more buoyancy, if you will, relatively speaking, of West Texas Intermediate, is that despite China probably buying less overall, they probably are buying more from the United States specifically as a result of this deal. And we saw with that narrowing differential, plus the fact that China directionally had tried to resume as of December buying a bit more, we think that probably is moving in the right direction and to the advantage of the U.S. there. So that's somewhat self-correcting.
Okay,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Foreman, anything surprising in the report from your standpoint that we did not cover today that you wanted to mention to the listeners?
Well, we have this economic indicator that we track every month, the API DEI, diesel or distillate economic indicator, where we take the industrial side of the economy and put this into a machine to come up with an index. And what it has been saying for the last year is that things had slowed on the industrial side, even though they were still strong on the consumer side of the U.S. economy. And it was interesting with January, with that weakness, especially on the diesel side, despite the expectation that agriculture and manufacturing might pick up with the U.S.-China trade deal, that definitely, after stabilizing still a negative, slightly negative territory, the index really decelerated further in January, suggesting that it's gotten worse before it'll get better on the industrial side of the U.S. economy. So watch this space. We need to see. I'm still optimistic that these trends turn around later this year based on fundamentals that we see.
Okay. All right, Dr. Foreman, that is it once again. Thank you for your time today, and we will make sure to tar and feather Nate for not getting this scheduled properly. And so we're publicly shaming him now, and we will privately tar and feather him, and then put him down the stockades at the square. So don't worry, he will not. We won't let this happen again on our side. So thank you for coming on. Go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, I would say I will definitely wear my historian hat for the tarring and for the tar and feathering.
Make sure we have the right kind of tar, appropriate amount of feathers. Exactly. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Foreman, this is at api.org. We will link to this report. It came out last Thursday on the show notes. I'm guessing y'all were off for President's Day last week is why we didn't get you on. And so thank you for making special time for us. We'll probably have you on quicker than normal because it'll be just around the corner before I guess you're going to have your quarterly. Was your quarterly report come out in March or April? I can't remember. Is it going to?
We have a quarterly coming out in March, and
okay, good.
I think we'll have some really good stories for this.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Thank you so much for coming in. API.org is the website. We'll link to that in the show notes. Dr. Foreman, thank you once again.
Thank you both. I always enjoy talking with you. Thanks.
Bye.
And once again, that is Dr. Dean Foreman with the American Petroleum Institute, API.org. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. Ellen Wald, we are up against the clock. So where will you be this week?
I will be on investing.com and Forbes. And then next week, just want to remind the listeners that I am going to be at the Cato Institute in DC on a panel discussing the Iran crisis and American energy security. And I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes because if you can't attend, you can also watch the live stream.
Cool. Crisis is the key word there. We need to convene a panel to talk about a crisis. I like that. If you're interested in the duck debate, Text Oil and Gas Podcast had on Ted Hall talking about how many ducks are on the pond, and you can hear his theory. We had him on last August, and so I'll let you listeners that are interested in the ducks go check that out. Beyond that, be back here next week. It was good to talk to everyone. And is it March the next time we're on this show, Ellen?
It is March.
March or
February is a short month. It's a short month. There is an extra day. Do not forget.
It's an extra day, though. It's a long February.
It's a long February. There's a February 29th. So do not
happy
forget.
Leap Day to everyone and all the folks that are Leap Day babies out there. Happy
birthday
to you. Your first time in 4 years. So, okay. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.